In the dead of a Dakota winter, when the silence is so cold it has a sound of its own, a lonely woman heard something that would change her world forever. Her name was Martha Connolly. She was a widow, living in a small cabin her husband Thomas had built with his own two hands before the earth took him back. All she had left of him was a grave marker under a mountain of snow and a heavy Winchester rifle hanging over the fireplace. On this night, the wind was a hungry animal clawing at the walls of her tiny home. The fire was her only friend, spitting and crackling in the stone hearth. She was mending one of Thomas's old shirts, trying to feel him in the worn fabric, when she heard it. A sound on the wind. Faint at first, she told herself it was just a coyote or the groan of a heavy pine branch. The wilderness plays tricks on you when you're all alone. But then it came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. It was high-pitched, desperate, and human. It was the cry of a child, lost in the frozen dark. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over her. No one should be out here. No one. The nearest town was a half-day's ride, and this was no weather for travel. Her mind raced. A broken-down wagon? A family lost in the blizzard? Or something worse? She went to the door, pressing her ear against the rough wood. The cry came again, a raw shriek of pure terror that cut right through the wind's howl. And it was followed by another sound, a sound that turned her blood to ice, a low guttural growl, then another, and another, a whole chorus of snarling. Wolves, a full pack. And they'd found the child. Every instinct screamed at her to bar the door, throw another log on the fire, and hide. She was one woman against a pack of nature's most perfect killers. What could she possibly do? But the thought of that child, alone and surrounded by teeth in the darkness, she couldn't bear it. She couldn't live with the silence that would come after. In a single heartbeat, the decision was made. It wasn't courage. It was just something she had to do. She moved with a sudden, desperate purpose. She pulled Thomas's Winchester from the pegs over the fireplace. The steel was cold and heavy in her hands, but it felt right. He'd taught her to shoot, taught her to make every bullet count. A wasted shot is a wasted life, he used to say. She checked the chamber, the practiced motion a small comfort. She grabbed a powder horn, a pouch of lead balls, and stuffed them into the pocket of her thickest wool coat. Pulling on her boots and wrapping a scarf around her face, she took a deep breath and unlatched the heavy wooden bar on the door. The second she pulled it open, the storm crashed into her cabin. It was a physical force throwing snow and the scent of pine and violence into the room, and it brought the sounds into sharp, terrifying focus. The snarling was a frenzy now, punctuated by the child's screams. They were close, frighteningly close, just beyond the clearing in the trees. She grabbed the lantern from its hook, shielding the wild flame with her body, and stepped out into the black and white chaos of the storm. The lantern's light was pathetic. It cast a tiny shifting circle in an ocean of darkness. She held the Winchester tight against her shoulder and pushed forward, her boots sinking deep into the fresh powder. "Hey!" she yelled, her voice sounding thin and weak against the wind. "Get out of there! Get!" For a moment the snarling paused. A human voice was something they didn't expect. Holding the lantern high, she took another step. The rifle felt like an extension of her arm, an iron spine against the fear. She scanned the darkness, her eyes straining. And then the light caught them. A ring of glowing eyes, yellow, green, merciless, floating in the darkness just beyond the trees. They were bigger than she'd imagined. Great Plains wolves, gaunt and starving from the hard winter. She counted 6, 7, maybe 8 pairs of eyes. And in the center of their circle, huddled against the base of a tree, was a small, dark shape. A child, no older than 5 or 6. One of the wolves, a massive gray male with a dark slash of fur across its back, took a step forward. It lowered its head, peeled its lips back from its teeth in a silent, terrifying snarl. The alpha. It was testing her. Martha's heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. But Thomas's words echoed in her mind. Don't show fear. Stand your ground. Make the first shot a statement. She raised the Winchester, lining the iron sights up with the alpha's broad chest. The child let out another sob, and the wolf tensed, coiling its muscles to spring. There was no more time. The rifle's report was a deafening crack that shattered the night. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, the muzzle flash blinding her for a second. The wolf let out a choked, wet yelp and stumbled back, its front leg collapsing under it. She'd hit it low. Not a clean kill, but it was enough. The smell of sulfur filled the air. The pack, stunned by the sound and the injury to their leader, fell back a few paces. Their growls were now mixed with confusion. They weren't used to their prey fighting back with thunder and fire. "Get away!" Martha screamed, her voice raw with adrenaline. She worked the rifle's lever, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. The metallic shick-shack was the deadliest sound in the world. She didn't want to shoot again. A wounded alpha was dangerous, but a fight with the whole pack was suicide. Her only hope was to scare them off. She took a step forward, then another. The lantern held out like a shield, the rifle at the ready. The wounded alpha struggled to its feet, blood steaming on the white snow. It fixed her with a look of pure, intelligent hatred before it turned and limped away into the darkness. After a moment's hesitation, the rest of the pack followed, melting back into the shadows. The glowing eyes vanished. Silence returned, broken only by the ringing in her ears and her own ragged, steaming breaths. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. Her attention snapped back to the child. He was still huddled by the tree, motionless. For a terrible second, she thought she was too late. Slowly she walked toward him, the lantern light falling across his small form. His face was smudged with dirt and tears, his dark eyes wide with a terror so deep it had stolen his voice. He was wrapped in a small buffalo calf robe, and his clothes were made of buckskin, decorated with intricate quill work. He was Lakota. His eyes flickered from her face to the rifle she was still holding, and he flinched, pressing himself harder against the tree. He was just as scared of her as he had been of the wolves. "It's all right," she said softly, her voice still shaky. She knew he probably didn't understand her words, but she hoped the tone would. She carefully set the rifle down in the snow, a gesture of peace. Then she knelt, keeping her distance, and held out her empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." He just watched her, his small body trembling. She saw a deep gash on his forearm where one of the wolves had gotten close, blood seeping through his sleeve. He needed warmth, he needed care, and he needed it now. She reached out slowly, her movements measured and calm. He didn't pull away. With a gentleness she didn't know she possessed, she scooped him into her arms. He was lighter than a sack of flour, a fragile bundle of bones. He stiffened for a moment, and then, as the warmth of her body seeped through his cold clothes, he went limp, burying his face in the rough wool of her coat. A single exhausted sob escaped him. Holding the child in one arm, she picked up her rifle and the lantern. Martha Connolly turned her back on the hungry woods and carried the lost Lakota boy toward the solitary light of her home. She had no idea that this one simple act of kindness was about to set off a chain reaction that would unravel a dark conspiracy and change the entire valley forever. The warmth of the cabin felt like a punch in the face after the biting cold. Martha kicked the door shut and threw the heavy wooden bar into place. The solid thud seemed to seal them off from the nightmare outside. The fire had burned low, so she quickly added more logs, coaxing the flames back to life. She gently placed the boy on the thick bearskin rug in front of the hearth, the warmest spot in the house. He immediately curled into a tight ball, his dark eyes following her every move with a weary intensity. He hadn't made a single sound since she'd picked him up. The silence was unnerving. "Let's have a look at that arm," she said, her voice soft. She brought a basin of warm water and a clean cloth. Kneeling beside him, she gently took his arm. He flinched but didn't fight her. His buckskin sleeve was stiff with frozen blood. With her sewing shears, she carefully cut the material away. The wound was ugly. 4 deep puncture wounds, already swollen and red. The wolf had been so close. As she cleaned the wound with the carbolic soap the doctor in town swore by, she studied the boy. His hair was long and as black as a raven's wing. His skin was the color of rich copper. And his eyes held a seriousness that seemed far too old for his small frame. This was not some neglected child. His deerskin clothes were beautifully made, adorned with elegant quill work. He was cared for. He was loved. which meant someone was desperately looking for him. She applied a salve of yarrow and comfrey and wrapped his arm in clean linen strips. Through it all, he remained silent, his gaze fixed on her. It was an ancient stare, and it felt like he was looking right through her, weighing her soul. "There now," she said, tying off the bandage. "That should hold." She stood up and ladled some venison stew that had been simmering over the fire into a bowl. The rich, savory smell filled the cabin. She brought it to him, along with a wooden spoon. He looked at the bowl, then back at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't move. "It's food," she encouraged, nudging the bowl a little closer. "You must be hungry." He shook his head, a small but definite motion. He pushed the bowl away with his good hand. She understood immediately. He wouldn't take food from a stranger, a white stranger. The mistrust between their peoples was a chasm carved by generations of broken promises and violence. It was a wound far deeper than the one on his arm. She didn't press him. Instead, she sat in her own chair and ate a few spoonfuls herself to show him it wasn't poison. She left the bowl on the hearth where it would stay warm, just in case he changed his mind. Exhaustion began to roll over her, a heavy blanket of physical and emotional fatigue. What was she going to do with him? The most logical thing was to take him to the nearest settlement, Pine Ridge. But the thought made her stomach clench. The sentiment in town was poison. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was only 2 years past, and the wounds on both sides were still raw. To the folks in Pine Ridge, a Lakota child wasn't a child. He was the enemy. They would see him as a threat, a spy, or worse. And what about his people? They had to be searching for him. A child doesn't just get lost in a blizzard like this. Something terrible must have happened. That thought sent another chill down her spine. Were they out there now, watching her cabin? She looked at the boy. His eyes had finally fluttered shut. His breathing evened out into the soft rhythm of sleep. In that moment, he wasn't Lakota or white, enemy or friend. He was just a little boy, hurt and alone, who had fallen asleep by her fire. Deciding she could do no more until morning, she made a small bed for him with a spare blanket and a pillow. She gently lifted him from the rug and settled him in. For the first time, he seemed to relax completely, his small body sinking into the warmth. She pulled her own chair close to the hearth, the Winchester leaning against it, and planned to stand watch all night. But the long day, the adrenaline, and the warmth of the fire conspired against her. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she drifted off into a fitful, haunted sleep. She woke with a jolt. The first pale gray light of dawn was filtering through the window. The cabin was cold. The fire had died down to embers. Her first thought was of the boy. He was still asleep, his chest rising and falling peacefully. But something felt wrong. The silence outside was different. The wind had died down, and the world was muffled by a fresh blanket of snow. But it was more than that. It was a feeling, a presence. Cautiously, she moved to the window, wiping away the frost with the heel of her hand. She peered out into the gray dawn, and her heart stopped. Her yard, which yesterday had been a barren, empty expanse of white, was now filled with gifts. Neatly arranged in a wide, deliberate semicircle facing her front door was a breathtaking fortune. There were at least a dozen thick, beautifully tanned buffalo robes, their dark fur a stark contrast to the snow. Piled beside them were stacks of supple deer skins and the luxurious, silvery pelts of beaver and fox. There were rawhide bags painted with bold geometric designs, bursting with dried meat and smoked fish. An intricately beaded rifle scabbard lay next to a magnificent ceremonial pipe. Near the edge of the display sat a small, perfectly crafted wooden horse, its mane and tail made from real horsehair. It was more wealth than Martha had ever seen in her life. It was a hunting season's worth of work, a year's worth of security, a tribe's riches, laid out in her yard as a silent, powerful statement. She stumbled back from the window, her hand flying to her mouth. They had been here, the boy's people. They had been out there in the darkness, watching her. They had seen her fight the wolves. They had seen her bring the boy inside. They had seen her tend his wounds. And they hadn't approached her, hadn't demanded his return. Instead, they had waited for the dawn and left this offering. This was no simple thank you. It was a payment of a debt so immense it humbled her. She, a poor white widow, had saved one of their children, and they had responded by bestowing upon her the riches of their nation. The boy stirred, awakened by her movement. He sat up and looked at her, his dark eyes clear now, no longer filled with terror, but with a quiet curiosity. He followed her gaze to the window, then padded over on silent bare feet. He looked out, and a small smile, the first she had seen, touched his lips. He knew what it meant. He turned to her, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was soft, but the word was clear. "Wapala," he said. "Thank you." At that moment, the cabin door was no longer a barrier between two worlds. It was a threshold, and Martha knew that by stepping across it last night, she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Her simple, solitary life was over. And just as that thought settled in her soul, she heard a new sound. Hoofbeats, approaching from the east, from the direction of Pine Ridge. It was a single rider, coming fast. The newfound sense of wonder was instantly shattered, replaced by a familiar, chilling dread. Trouble was coming, and it was riding in on the morning sun. The rider was Sheriff Brody, and he was not a man known for social calls. He reined in his big roan horse at the edge of the impossible display in her yard, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into raw suspicion. Brody was a bull of a man, with a thick neck and a drooping mustache that couldn't hide his perpetual sneer. He carried the law like a club, and his justice almost always sided with the powerful. "Connolly!" he barked, not even bothering to dismount. It was a clear power play. "What in God's name is all this?" Martha stepped out onto her porch, pulling her shawl tighter. The boy, sensing the new tension, darted behind her skirts, peeking out with one eye. "Looks like gifts, Sheriff," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "Gifts?" Brody spat the word like it was poison. He swung down from his horse, his boots crunching in the snow. He walked around the items, prodding a buffalo robe with the toe of his boot as if it were something vile. "This ain't gifts. This is Sioux devilry. Where'd it come from?" His eyes, small and hard as river stones, pinned her. "And whose brat is that you're hiding?" "He was lost," Martha said, her voice turning cold. "A wolf pack had him cornered last night. I brought him in." "You what?" Brody's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. "Are you insane, woman? You brought a savage into your home? We have laws about consorting with hostiles." "He's a child, Sheriff. He was about to be torn to pieces." "He's a Lakota," Brody shot back. "And they left this bribe. They're trying to buy you. What are they after? What did you see out there?" The intensity of his questioning was bizarre. It went beyond the usual frontier prejudice. There was a sharp, almost frantic edge to it. He seemed less angry about the boy and more agitated by the gifts. "Why?" Martha stood her ground. "I saw a child in trouble, and I helped him. His people are grateful. That's all there is to it." Brody took a step closer, his bulk casting a long shadow over her. "You listen to me, Martha. You're a widow all alone out here. You're vulnerable. You think this is some kind of peace offering? It's a marker. They own you now. They'll be back. And when the trouble starts, and believe me, it will start, you'll be right in the middle of it. Now you give me the boy. I'll take him into town, and we'll figure out what to do with him." He reached for the boy, a sudden, aggressive movement. But Martha moved faster, positioning herself fully between them. "No." The word was quiet, but it hung in the cold air with the finality of a slammed door. Brody's eyes narrowed into slits. "Don't be a fool, Martha. You're obstructing the law." "And what law says you can take a child who has done nothing wrong?" Her voice rose, laced with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "What will you do with him in Pine Ridge? Lock him in your jail cell? Hand him over to the first drunk who wants to teach a savage a lesson? He stays here. He is under my protection." They stood locked in a silent standoff. Brody was clearly stunned by her defiance. Most people in the territory cowered before him. He finally let out a short, humorless laugh. "Have it your way, then. But when his kin come back with rifles instead of robes, don't come crying to me. You're on your own." He turned, swung himself back onto his horse, and gave the yard one last contemptuous look. I'd get rid of this junk if I were you. Looks bad. Makes people wonder what else you're trading with him. With a sharp tug on the reins, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward town, leaving a cloud of disturbed snow in his wake. Martha watched him go, her body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. The boy tugged on her dress. She looked down at him. He placed his small, uninjured hand on her arm, a gesture of comfort. In his dark eyes, she saw not just gratitude, but a deep, knowing understanding. He had seen men like Brody before. The encounter left Martha deeply unsettled. Brody's reaction wasn't just bigotry, it was something more. It was possessive, paranoid, almost desperate. Why was he so frantic to get his hands on this one child? The answer started to arrive later that day, in a buggy pulled by a tired-looking horse. It was Dr. Samuel Finch. Dr. Finch was a man in his late 50s with kind, weary eyes behind spectacles and an air of quiet intelligence that set him apart from the rough-hewn locals. He was one of the few people who had shown Martha genuine kindness after Thomas died. "Martha," he called out, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "I came as soon as I heard. Brody is stirring up a hornet's nest in town, spreading stories that you're harboring a Sioux warrior, that you've made some kind of pact. I see the story has grown from a rather spectacular seed." "It's not what he thinks, Samuel," Martha said, relief washing over her at the sight of a friendly face. She told him everything. The cry in the night, the wolves, the rescue, the silent gifts at sunrise. She brought him inside and showed him the boy, who was sitting by the fire, carving a piece of scrap wood with a small, dull knife she'd given him. Dr. Finch examined the boy's arm with a professional eye. "A clean wound, and you've dressed it perfectly. He's a lucky young man." He then knelt down and spoke a few words in halting, academic Lakota. The boy looked up, surprised. He responded with a short phrase. "He says his name is Chang Te," the doctor translated. "It means heart. And he says his family was attacked by white men, not soldiers. They had dirty faces and wore the skins of animals." The doctor's face grew grim. "Martha, this is more complicated than a lost child. The Lakota do not bestow gifts of this magnitude for a simple act of kindness. This is a display of power and honor reserved for something or someone of immense importance. This boy is not just any child." He walked over to the small pile of the boy's belongings she had set aside. He picked up a small leather pouch that had been tied to the boy's belt. It was skillfully made, but what caught his eye was a crude symbol burned into the flap, a circle with a jagged line through it. "This is not a Lakota tribal marking," he murmured, rubbing the symbol with his thumb. "I've seen this before. It's the brand of Silas Kane's gang." Martha's blood ran cold. Silas Kane was a notorious outlaw, a former trapper turned rustler and murderer. He and his small band of renegades were known for their brutality, attacking anyone, settler or Indian, for profit. Sheriff Brody claimed to have been hunting Kane for years, always one step behind. Dr. Finch carefully opened the pouch. Inside, nestled in soft rabbit fur, were two items. One was a single, flawlessly crafted arrowhead made of black obsidian. The other was a piece of metal. It was the broken half of a silver concho, the kind used to decorate an expensive saddle. It was ornately engraved with a complex swirling pattern. The doctor stared at the broken concho, and all the color drained from his face. "My God," he whispered. He looked from the concho to Martha, his eyes filled with a terrifying new understanding. "Martha, a few months ago, a land surveyor from the railroad was found dead 20 miles north of here, ambushed and robbed. Brody ruled it a Lakota raid, said the evidence was clear. It nearly started a war. The only thing that stopped it was the staunch denial of the Oglala chiefs." He held the silver piece up to the light. The surveyor was a wealthy man from back east. He rode a prize horse with a custom-made saddle, decorated with unique, one-of-a-kind silver conchos. I saw them myself when his body was brought in. This is a piece of one of them." The silence in the cabin was thick with implication. "What are you saying, Samuel?" Martha asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying this boy, Chang Te, is the sole witness to the real crime. It wasn't a Lakota raid that killed that surveyor. It was Silas Kane's gang. They must have then ambushed the boy's family, maybe for their horses, and the boy escaped with his pouch. Suddenly, Sheriff Brody's frantic desperation to get his hands on the boy made a chilling kind of sense. It wasn't about prejudice. It was about silencing a witness. And Brody, Martha began, the horrific thought taking shape. Brody has been hunting Kane for 2 years with no success, Dr. Finch finished, his voice grave. Perhaps because he has no interest in finding him. A constant Indian threat is very useful for a man who wants to keep the territory unsettled, to keep land prices low for certain friends of his. An open war would be even more profitable for men who stand to gain from clearing the Lakota out of the hills for good. Martha looked at Chung Tae, who was watching them with his wise, silent eyes. He wasn't just a child she had saved. He was the key. He was a piece of living evidence that could unravel a dark conspiracy that reached all the way to the heart of the law in Pine Ridge. And he was living in her house. The gifts in the yard were no longer just a sign of honor. They were a beacon, drawing the attention of everyone. The grateful Lakota, the corrupt sheriff, and the murderous outlaws who now knew exactly where their only witness was hiding. Martha Connolly's homestead was no longer a quiet refuge. It had become the dead calm center of a gathering storm. The days that followed were a masterclass in quiet terror. Martha brought the priceless gifts inside, storing the robes and pelts in her small loft. To leave them outside felt like a boast, and she had no desire to provoke any more anger from town. But every time she felt the weight and quality of the hides, it was a heavy reminder of the debt she now carried, and the danger it represented. Her life settled into a strange new rhythm. She and Chang Tae built a silent language of gestures and single words. She learned that he loved the smell of baking bread, but would not eat it until she broke a piece for herself first. He was fascinated by her water pump and would watch, captivated, as she worked the handle. He taught her the Lakota word for wolf, Shung Manitou, and would reenact the attack with his small wooden carvings, always ending with a figure representing her standing tall with a stick. But outside her cabin, the world was closing in. Her weekly trip to Pine Ridge for supplies became an ordeal of hostile stares and slammed doors. Old acquaintances would literally cross the street to avoid her. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Indian lover, traitor, gone savage. Only Dr. Finch would speak to her openly, sharing a quiet word of encouragement while she bought medical supplies. Sheriff Brody, however, made his presence known in other ways. He didn't confront her again, but he started sending his young, nervous deputy, a man named Miller, to her homestead on flimsy pretexts. First, it was to ask if she'd seen any stray cattle. A week later, it was to warn her about increased hostile activity in the area. Martha knew these were surveillance missions. She would stand on her porch, polite but unyielding, the Winchester always leaning just inside the door, until the deputy would retreat, his face a mask of discomfort. He was a terrible liar. But there was another, more unsettling surveillance. Martha began to feel she was being watched by unseen eyes from the pine-covered ridge that overlooked her property. Sometimes at dawn or dusk, she would catch a flicker of movement, the silhouette of a rider against the sky, there for a heartbeat and then gone. One morning, she found a single eagle feather stuck into the top rail of her fence. It was a clear and deliberate sign, but it wasn't threatening. It felt protective. Chang Tae's people. They were watching the boy. They were watching her. They knew she was keeping him safe, and they were standing guard from a distance, respecting the boundary she had drawn. This silent vigil was both a comfort and a constant, unnerving reminder of the stakes. One afternoon, Dr. Finch arrived in a hurry, his face more grim than usual. "Martha, I have news, and it's not good." He sat at her table while Chang Tae played outside, within sight of the window. "I did some quiet asking. It seems Silas Kane and his men were seen in town 2 nights ago, at the saloon long after dark. They were meeting with someone." "Brody," Martha said. It wasn't a question. "Worse," the doctor said, leaning forward. "My source says Brody's deputy Miller was there. He saw them slip into the back room of the sheriff's office with Brody. They weren't just meeting. They're partners." Martha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. So it's true. It's more than that, the doctor said, his voice low. I also received a letter from a colleague at Fort Laramie. He knows the Lakota leadership well. The boy, Chung Tae, his father is a man named Matho Wanataka, Ghost Bear. He's not just a chief, Martha. He's one of the most respected and powerful Oglala war leaders. A man known for his wisdom, but also for his fierce devotion to his people. His wife, the boy's mother, was killed in that ambush by Kane's men. The weight of this revelation settled on her, crushing the air from her lungs. She hadn't just saved a child. She had saved the only son of Ghost Bear. The gifts, the silent watch on the ridge, it all snapped into focus. This wasn't just about honor. It was about the heir to a legacy. Brody must know, she whispered. If he knows who the boy is, he knows that killing him would be an unforgivable provocation. It would guarantee the war he wants. Precisely, Dr. Finch agreed. Chong Tae is not just a witness to be silenced. He's a pawn in a much deadlier game. Brody needs to get him back, not to kill him himself, but to make it look like he died in a settler attack, or to hand him over to Kane to finish the job far away from here. Either way, Ghost Bear's wrath would fall upon the entire territory. The army would move in, the treaties would be broken for good, and the land would be cleared. A terrible, cold clarity washed over Martha. Brody wouldn't wait much longer. His quiet intimidation had failed. His next move would be decisive, and it would be brutal. Her fear was confirmed 2 nights later. A blizzard descended on the hills, a howling gale of wind and snow that reduced visibility to nothing. It was the perfect cover for evil deeds. As Martha was securing the shutters, a frantic pounding came at her door. She grabbed the Winchester, her heart leaping into her throat. "Who's there?" "It's me, Deputy Miller." The voice was strained, panicked. "Please, Mrs. Connolly, let me in. I have to warn you." Warily, she lifted the bar and cracked open the door. Deputy Miller stumbled inside, covered in snow, his young face pale and terrified. He was alone. "He's coming," Miller gasped, breathing heavily. "Sheriff Brody. He's riding with Kane and his men. They're coming for the boy. Brody told everyone in town that Ghost Bear's war party was sighted and that he's deputizing a posse to secure the Indian brat for everyone's safety. But it's a lie. It's Kane's men he's deputized. They're going to take the boy, and they're going to kill you to make it look like you resisted." "Why are you telling me this?" Martha asked, her eyes searching his for any sign of a trick. Miller's face crumpled with shame. "I can't be a part of it. My pa was a lawman. He taught me the badge meant something. Brody, he spits on it. I heard them planning it. Kane said they'd make it look like Lakota infighting, a rival band trying to kidnap the boy. No one would question it. They'll be here before the blizzard breaks." The howl of the wind outside suddenly sounded like the cries of the damned. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run. There was no one to help. "What do we do?" she asked, the question directed as much to herself as to the terrified young lawman. Chang Tae, who had been watching from the corner, walked to her side. He looked at the window, then at her. He pointed to the ridge, then placed a hand over his heart. "My people." An idea, desperate, wild, and impossibly risky, sparked in Martha's mind. The silent watchers, her protectors. "Miller, is your horse strong?" she asked, her voice hardening with sudden resolve. "Yes, ma'am. A good Morgan." "Then you're going to ride, not east to town, but north, along the base of that ridge. You're going to ride 100 yards, stop, and fire your pistol 3 times into the air. Then you ride like hell back to Dr. Finch's office and you stay there. You tell him what you told me." "Fire my pistol? But they'll hear me." "That's the point," Martha said. She moved to the hearth and pulled a loose stone from its side. Behind it was Thomas's old cavalry pistol and a box of cartridges. "I'm not the only one who's been listening." She knew it was a gamble of impossible odds. She was trusting a terrified deputy to carry a message she couldn't even speak to a people she had never met. She was betting her life, and the boys, on a single eagle feather on a fence post and a flicker of movement on a hill. Miller, seeing the raw determination in her eyes, nodded. His fear seemed to give way to a flicker of courage. "Yes, ma'am, I'll do it." He turned and plunged back out into the blizzard. A few minutes later, through the storm's fury, Martha heard it. 3 muffled gunshots, spaced a few seconds apart. A signal, a plea, a prayer fired into the storm. She barred the door and extinguished the main lantern, leaving only the low dancing light of the fire. She handed the heavy cavalry pistol to Chang Tae, showing him how to hold it, though it was far too big for him. "Do not be scared," she said, looking him square in the eye. He nodded, his face a small, stoic mask. She took her place by the window, the Winchester rifle cold and solid in her hands, and she waited. She listened to the wind, praying that her message had been heard, praying that help was coming. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and the only sound was the howling storm, a cold dread began to seep into her bones. What if they weren't there tonight? What if the storm drove them to shelter? What if Miller got lost? What if she was wrong? Then a new sound emerged from the blizzard's howl. Not thunder, not the wind. It was the jingle of harnesses and the low murmur of men's voices. They were here. Martha Connolly chambered around, rested the rifle barrel on the windowsill, and prepared to make her last stand. The riders emerged from the swirling snow like phantoms, dark shapes on horseback materializing in the faint light spilling from Martha's window. She counted 8 of them. At the lead was Sheriff Brody, his face illuminated for a moment, hard and pitiless. Beside him rode a lean, wiry man with a cruel face and a long scar down his cheek. Silas Kane. The rest were Kane's men, their faces hidden by scarves and low-brimmed hats, but their predatory posture was unmistakable. "Martha Connolly!" Brody's voice boomed, barely rising above the gale. "Come out and turn over the Sioux boy. We have information his people are coming to raid this valley, and we're taking him into protective custody." It was a lie so bald-faced it was almost comical. Martha remained silent, her eye lined up with the rifle's sights. Her target was Brody. If she was going to die tonight, she would take the serpent's head with her. "Don't be a fool, Connolly," Kane shouted, his voice a gravelly rasp. "We know you're in there alone. Send out the brat, and the sheriff might be lenient with you." Behind her, Chang Tae stood like a small statue. He held the heavy pistol with both hands, his knuckles white. He wasn't crying. His father's blood ran true. "You're trespassing, Sheriff," Martha called out, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "You and your murdering friend. I know what you did to that surveyor. I know you ambushed this boy's family. The boy has proof." A stunned silence fell over the posse, broken only by the wind. Her words had struck home, a direct hit. The pretense was over. Brody and Kane exchanged a look of pure fury. "Damn you, woman," Brody snarled. "Last chance." He raised his hand, ready to give the order to storm the cabin. But in that exact instant, a new sound cut through the blizzard. It was not the wind. It was a cry, a high, ululating cry that seemed to come from all directions at once. A war cry. It came from the ridgeline, from the trees, from the very snow itself. Figures rose up. On horseback and on foot, they had been as silent and invisible as the falling snow until this very moment. They were not ghosts. They were Lakota warriors, their faces painted for battle, their breath misting in the frigid air. They held rifles and bows, and they formed a wide, unbreakable ring around the homestead, trapping Brody's posse in a circle of imminent death. They were not a dozen. They were 50, maybe more. They had appeared as if summoned from the earth. At their head, on a magnificent war pony that stood unfazed by the storm, was a man who commanded authority with his mere presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a mask of profound grief and cold, controlled fury. A long scar ran over one eye, but his gaze was sharp and piercing. He wore a simple buckskin shirt and a single eagle feather in his long black hair. This was Matho Wanataka, Ghost Bear. Brody's posse froze. Their bravado evaporated into sheer primal terror. They were hopelessly, catastrophically outnumbered. Silas Kane, ever the pragmatist, began to slowly raise his hands in surrender. Brody, however, was trapped. His lies had cornered him completely. With a desperate, animalistic roar, he drew his revolver and fired wildly at the cabin window. The shot went wide, splintering the wood frame inches from Martha's head. It was the only shot he would fire. Before he could even think to aim again, an arrow fletched in black flew from the darkness with impossible speed. It buried itself deep in his shoulder with a sickening thump, spinning him halfway out of his saddle. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and shock, dropping his pistol into the snow. Ghost Bear rode forward, his horse parting the sea of warriors. He did not look at the wounded, whimpering sheriff. His eyes were fixed on the cabin door. Slowly, Martha unbarred the door and opened it. She stood on the threshold, her rifle held loosely at her side. Beside her, Changte stepped forward. "Ate!" the boy cried, his voice ringing with a joy and relief that was heartbreaking to hear. "Father!" He ran out into the snow, into the arms of the formidable warrior who swept him up from the ground and held him in a fierce embrace. Ghost Bear buried his face in his son's hair, and for a long moment, the fearsome war chief was nothing more than a father reunited with his lost child. He then looked over his son's head at Martha. His eyes conveyed a depth of emotion that no words could capture. It was gratitude, respect, and a profound sorrow for what she had been forced to endure. He gave a short, sharp order in Lakota. Several warriors dismounted and, with brutal efficiency, rounded up the terrified posse, disarming them and binding their hands. The final piece of the puzzle arrived as the first light of dawn began to break, the blizzard having blown itself out. Dr. Finch appeared in his buggy. Beside him, his face grim but resolute, sat Deputy Miller. "Ghost Bear," Dr. Finch said, stepping down and addressing the chief with a respect that was palpable. He pointed a trembling finger at the captured men. "Sheriff Brody and Silas Kane are responsible for the murder of a railroad surveyor, a crime for which they framed your people. They are also responsible for the ambush that took your wife. Deputy Miller is here to testify to all of it." Ghost Bear's gaze shifted to Brody, who was slumped in his saddle, pale from blood loss and fear. The chief spoke, his voice low and resonant, and Dr. Finch translated. "He says that the white man's law has failed. It is corrupt. But he will not start a war over the actions of cowards and thieves. He will not shed the blood of his warriors for men like this." His gaze fell on Deputy Miller. "He says the man with the shining badge now has a choice. He can prove his law has honor, or he can prove it is worthless." Deputy Miller, his face set like stone, walked over to Brody. He took Brody's own handcuffs from his belt. "Sheriff Brody," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and attempted murder." He clasped the iron cuffs on his former boss's wrists. He did the same to Silas Kane and the rest of his stunned, shivering men. The reckoning was not a storm of violence, but a quiet, profound transfer of power. The Lakota did not take their vengeance. They simply watched, their presence an undeniable force, as the white community was forced to cleanse its own house. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden light on the snow-covered yard, Ghost Bear dismounted, still holding his son. He walked to Martha's porch. He reached into a pouch at his belt and produced a necklace, a simple leather thong holding a single, beautifully carved bear claw. "He calls you Wichapi Wangjila," Dr. Finch translated, his voice soft. "One-star woman, because you were a single light of hope in the darkness. He says the gifts in your yard were not just a payment, they were a test. Any other settler would have sold them or driven the boy away. They were a measure of your heart. You have proven you have the heart of the Lakota." Ghost Bear gently placed the necklace around Martha's neck. "This," the doctor continued, "is a mark of honor, a sign that you are a friend to his people. You and this land will always be protected." Changte then reached out and hugged her leg, looking up at her with his serious dark eyes. "Wapila, Wichapi Wangjila," he said. "Thank you, one-star woman." Martha knelt and hugged him back, a single tear tracing a path down her weathered cheek. She watched as the Lakota warriors melted back into the hills as silently as they had appeared. She watched as Deputy Miller, with Dr. Finch as his witness, led the disgraced sheriff and his criminal partners away to face settler justice. Martha Connolly stood on her porch, the bear claw necklace warm against her skin, and looked out over her small piece of land. The yard was scarred with the tracks of the night's events, but the rising sun promised a new day. She was no longer just a widow, an outcast, or a survivor. She was Wichapi Wangjila, a woman who had faced down wolves and wicked men, and in doing so had become a bridge between two worlds, a living legend in the heart of the Wild West. The story of the one-star woman reminds us that real courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about seeing something that needs to be done and doing it, no matter how scared you are. In a world full of hatred and division, she chose compassion. She didn't see an enemy, she saw a child. And for that one single act of humanity, she received an honor greater than any amount of gold or silver. Her story shows that true strength isn't found in building walls to keep people out, but in having the courage to open a door. It leaves us with a question. When you're faced with the choice between what is easy and what is right, what would you do? If this story of incredible bravery and unexpected justice resonated with you, do me a favor and hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true stories about the hidden heroes and forgotten dramas of history. Thanks for listening.